If they're a nuisance, but they're right, you got to listen to them. That's the key. Just because they are a nuisance doesn't mean they're wrong. So you got to understand right off the bat that if they're right, you got to say, oh, I heard you, let's fix this, which is the hardest thing to do. The hardest thing for humanity, for us as humans to do, is that we know that person who doesn't obey that rule. We talked about visitors parking. He's the guy who parks in visitors parking all the time, but at one time another person parks, he's the one saying, get rid of him, fine him, tow him, and we want to ignore them. We're going to have to understand that nuisance person is doing, saying something is right, you got to enforce it.
HOA Insights is brought to you by 5 companies that care about board members: Association Insights and Marketplace, Association Reserves, Community Financials, HOA Invest, and Kevin Davis Insurance Services. You'll find links to their websites and social media in the show notes.
Hi, I'm Robert Nordlund of Association Reserves.
And I'm Kevin Davis of Kevin Davis Insurance Services. And this is HOA Insights, where we promote common sense
for common areas. Well, welcome to episode number 98, where we're again speaking with insurance expert and regular co-host Kevin Davis about the nuisance nightmare, how to manage disruptions in your association. We've spoken about the rise in what we call incivility, and because of that, nuisance complaints are on the rise in community associations. That could be from the pickleball noise and violating pool hours to pet disputes. It goes the entire range. Well, this episode explores what constitutes a nuisance and how associations can enforce rules fairly and best practices for resolving conflicts before they escalate. We want you, our podcast audience, to be well-informed and to be well prepared. Well, this is a follow-up to episode number 97 with regular co-host Julie Adamen on effective strategies to deal with homeowner dissatisfaction, trying to minimize it or preventing it from gaining a foothold or a toehold in your association. If you missed that episode or any other prior episode, take a moment after today's program to listen from our podcast website, hoainsights.org, or watch on our YouTube channel. But better yet, subscribe from any of the major podcast platforms so you don't miss any future episodes. Well, those of you watching on YouTube can see the HOA Insights mug I have here. I think Kevin's got one also. And you can get one for yourself from our merch store, which you can browse through from our hoainsights.org website or the link in our show notes. You'll find we have some great items there for sale and some great free stuff like board member Zoom backgrounds. So go to the merch store, download a free Zoom background, take a moment, look around, and find the mug you'd like, and email me at podcast@reservestudy.com with your name, shipping address, mug choice, and mentioning episode 98 mug giveaway. And if you're the 10th person to email me, I'll ship that mug out to you free of charge. Well, we enjoy hearing from you, responding to the issues you're facing at your association. So if you have a hot topic, a crazy story, or a question you'd like us to address, you can contact us at 805-203-3130, or again, email us at podcast@reservestudy.com. And one of those questions led us to today's topic. It's Melissa from New Jersey who asked, our homeowners are not acting very neighborly. They're easily angered, meeting minutes being a couple days late, or parents with small kids angry with dog owners, and vice versa. Do you have any recommendations for helping people live in community? So, Kevin, what do we say to Melissa?
First of all, Robert, I'm glad to be here, and I enjoy doing these because, for me, we handle liability insurance. And we're seeing a rash of these kind of claims where people don't know what to do. These people who live in community associations are not doing things they should be doing. You have boards of directors who are treating them, in their word, disrespectfully.
Okay.
So we're talking about today is the nuisance. Board members are looking at certain people and labeling them nuisances because guess what? They're not paying their assessments, not paying their rules, they don't care about their pets, all the things you just said. And we talk about a nuisance, and basically a nuisance is somebody who's annoyed. I'm annoyed. I go to my community association, I go into their driveway, and I see the fence hasn't been taken care of, the trees haven't been trimmed, things haven't been wiped down. I'm just annoyed. Now, the problem, though, is that we have a group of people who are annoyed who haven't paid their assessments, who don't obey the rules, and we ignore them. And those are that group we're talking about today.
I just started thinking now, the people who are annoyed at what's going on in the association or what's not going on in the association. To our board member audience, it's hard running an association. There's things to do everywhere you look. And it makes it harder when you have these people that are bugging you. But I'm thinking that as a board member, you're easily bugged also because you're under a lot of stress. And so you're pushed into this area where you start to feel more nuisances, and maybe there are more nuisances. And then does that get into a cycle, a vortex where it's bad for everybody?
Yeah, and the problem, though, is that once you label somebody a nuisance, in other words, you have people in there that are criticized, but they pay their assessments, they work, they volunteer, and so they get heard a lot more. But we know that there's a group in that association that doesn't pay attention to the rules, doesn't pay their assessments, but they complain all day long, and they're the ones that get pushed aside. And when that lawsuit comes in, okay, the board is shocked and surprised because now all of a sudden there's a judgment because that one person who says, I'm annoyed, and annoyance is legitimate, you've ignored them. We live in a world now where a lot of us are annoyed just in general. I mean, we don't like what's going on. I mean, listen, it's February right now. It's been the longest.
It's been a long February.
It's been long. We have a lot of things to be. We live in a world where everybody is kind of just feeling way up here. But what happens is, and it's what we say a lot, boards have that fiduciary duty. They have to act responsibly. So just because you are a nuisance doesn't mean you get a chance to say, guess what? When you pay your dues on time, you pay your assessments on time, and you obey the rules, then I will listen to you. You don't have that luxury.
As much as you may want to say that, as soon as you start cleaning up after your dog, as soon as you start not leaving your trash in the trash room, but actually putting it down the chute or whatever it is, you want to say, hey, buddy, it's a two-way street. As a board member, you can't say that. You've got to be the responsible, loving, caring, communicating, even-tempered board member who's a leader. And boy, that's a tough ask, but that's the job that you have.
I think we need to start with this. What is a nuisance? Because once we understand what a nuisance is, the board can understand they have fiduciary duty to take care of it. Because right now, the board is saying, listen, this guy's a nuisance, and they walk away. Okay, we talk about a nuisance is an unreasonable interference by an individual, unreasonable interference by an individual who just happen to live in the community association. They want to use the community association. They want to enjoy the community association, but someone who's unreasonably interferes with that enjoyment. It could be the pickleball court we talk about, or the dog barking, or the dog, not cleaned up after him. So it gets to a point where when it becomes unreasonable. So once it becomes unreasonable, that's where that board gets to come into play. It's the difference between being inconvenienced versus annoyed. That's the part from a board member's mentality, And again, I always got to preface these talks by saying I am not a lawyer.
Yeah.
I'm talking out from a person who gets these kind of claims and saying, please, if you understand you have fiduciary responsibility to act in the best interest of your association and use reasonable care, then reasonable care means if somebody comes to you and says something unreasonable, you have to react to it.
So in addition to all the other skills we've talked about with board members, we need to suggest they also need to have a little bit of a thick skin.
Especially to this group. This is a specific group of people that we're talking about. We've done a lot of these talks about, you have to communicate these things. These people that we don't want to talk to. Because again, as soon as you pay your assessments, as soon as you clean up after your dog, we'll talk to you. It doesn't work.
I'm remembering when I was a board member, my unit number 8, my path to the mailbox. And there'd be times I wanted to, I was home from work and I time to go get my mail, and I would leave my front door to go to the mailbox, and I'd see someone out there. I was like, no, I'm going back in, because I didn't even want to cross paths with them, because I knew it was going to run into a conversation, and I just didn't want to do that.
Well, that brings up a good point there, Robert, in the sense that, we've talked about like public nuisances, where I'm looking out and seeing things are not being done. Now we have individual private nuisances where you don't like the fact that you don't walk by me because we have a issue between you and myself. So all of a sudden you may not like the wind chimes I have on my front door because they get up too early. You're annoyed by it. Now, the question is that, again, what does the board, it has something to do with the board's responsibility. If you go to that board and say, guess what? I can't handle anymore. These wind chimes, drive me crazy, and you go to the board, and especially the board looks at me as the nuisance in the association, because I probably would be the nuisance in the association. All of a sudden, that guy again, leave it alone. That doesn't mean the board has to do something or not, because we have to investigate. We have to do our job. And that's the thing is that we can't say, he's the nuisance, so we gotta, just leave him alone and go away, and sometimes the answer will be that, but we got to look into it. We have to investigate. The key word is always going to be, is that person being unreasonable? The unreasonableness to me, is the key factor in a lot of these things we're talking about.
Well, what you're saying here is that, okay, they've gone beyond inconvenienced and they're getting into unreasonable, but still, as a board member, you have a job to do. And you said that just a moment ago. And that job is to run the association, be even-tempered, to be a leader, to be hopefully an inspiring, good communicating leader. In our family, when our kids were young, we'd talk about they need to make like a duck. And in our family, that meant be like a duck and let the water just roll off your back. Don't let those arrows that people shoot at you penetrate. I read another thing somewhere, I was reading it, and it said, you don't have to show up to every fight you're invited to. And you can see it. You can see it coming, and maybe you know about it, but you need to be even-tempered and let it not penetrate and get into your heart and soul, because, Kevin, I think what we're going to talk about here today is when it starts to disrupt your actions as a board member, when that person pushes you out of your comfort zone or you start treating them differently.
Yes.
Isn't that it?
That's it.
Okay.
Yep. And that's it, because the easiest thing to do is to go overboard on that nuisance. So all of a sudden, you complain about me, or I complain about you, because you're the nice guy in the association, and you pay your assessments on time, you're well-liked. All of a sudden, now you go to the board and say, Kevin's wind chimes, they drive me crazy. I'm going to pull them down. And that board says, you know what? The guy's been a nuisance his entire life. Take those things down. I'll back you up on those things.
You've labeled them. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And what happens is it makes a difference between you doing that versus you say, you know what, let's communicate properly. Let's talk to each other. Let's get together and say, maybe the wind chimes are noisy. Okay. Maybe you put them on the other side of the building. Maybe you can change them. Sometimes the answer is just talking to each other. And again, as a board, sometimes that's it. That's all you need to do. It's okay. We investigated, and it is noisy, but it's not unreasonable. And that's the key word there. Are they being reasonable and not being reasonable? Well, he might be the nuisance association, but he does have a right to be able to sleep every night but the wind chimes blowing. Now, you may investigate and find out, guess what? The wind chimes only blowing once a month, And guess what? Now the person's not reasonable, So it's going to a different level.
So it's a matter of keeping an even keel and not letting your emotions get the better of you, and really looking at it as, how should I address this, and not label the person as, okay, they're the nuisance, so they don't get the benefit of the doubt. You still need to give everyone the benefit of the doubt.
But thinking of a community association, who gets the benefit of the doubt? We know a group is who always get the benefit of the doubt. The ones that smile, the ones that the duck, the duck, they always get the benefit of the doubt. If they're parking and visitors parking, they go, okay, excuse me, can you move? Oh, sure, no problem.
Oh, yeah.
They do.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I had a load of groceries.
Exactly.
Give me just a moment and I'll have it gone.
But what happened with that nuisance parking, visitors parking?
Don't tempt me, Kevin.
Yes, exactly. I love having these conversations that people never talk about. We're talking about the nuisance. People say, I love having the kind of this conversation with you, because we get a chance to talk about things nobody else will ever talk about. We'll talk about that guy who is just a nuisance in that association. It was just a pain, and every time you see him, you want to walk away from him. But guess what? That one day when he says that, you know what, you're late. And as because of you being late, you can't pass a special assessment. And you go, listen, we're going to do it anyway, because what do you know? You ain't paid assessment in a year, so we're behind. But that one guy who says that, and then when he does, he files that one claim. And all of a sudden, guess when that claim is filed, guess what happens? The board is found wrong, because it was late. And because it was late, they weren't allowed to do it. Now, if that board would have listened to that unit owner, just because he's a nuisance, and say, listen, we need to talk because, you were 3 days late on passing that assessment and you don't have the authority to do it. And we have a choice of saying, you know what, you're right, let's talk about it. Maybe we can redo it, do it next month, whatever. We say he's a nuisance, he has to pay his assessments in 3 months. Forget about it.
Kevin, you got me thinking of a couple more things. You've said so many times you want to lower the temperature.
Yes.
Lowering the temperature, I think the dial to lowering the temperature is just talking, letting the pressure off. Hey, having a civil conversation, looking them in the eye, giving them time to let their pressure get released, and you talk about it, and maybe at the end you can say, and oh, by the way, how are you doing on catching up with your assessments? Because that's something that honestly is irritating me. What you were doing, obviously what the association was doing was irritating you, but let's talk about this, get this out in the open. Oh, gee, I'm sorry, your check is coming in late. So as soon as you get, okay, now I understand. And can you turn a nuisance into not a friend, but can you neutralize that?
That's the word, neutralize. You want to neutralize it so that at the end of the day, you don't want to be sued. You don't want somebody to come in and say, guess what? You breached your fiduciary duty because I was reasonable, and you say I was unreasonable. That's a claim right there. I was reasonable. You said I wasn't reasonable. I'm going to sue you because as a result, you hurt my feelings. I can't show my face anymore in the community, and I'm suffering.
Yeah.
I want damages.
Okay. Well,
that's what you want to avoid.
Yeah. You want to avoid that. Well, that's a good point here. So let's take a quick break from this conversation. It's time to hear from one of our generous sponsors, after which we'll follow up with this and be back with more common sense for common areas.
Hi, I'm Kevin Davis, the president of Kevin Davis Insurance Services. Our experienced team of underwriters will help you when you get that declination. We provide the voice of reason, someone who will stand by you. Our underwriters bring years of knowledge to our clients that can't be automated by technology or driven by price. As a proud Anwins company, we bring true value to your community association clients. We are your community association insurance experts.
Okay, Kevin, right before the break, we were talking about the big point of doing what you need to do to not get sued. So yes, we're talking about, honestly, annoying people that are irritating you, and people that are nuisances. But how do you stay back and stay behind the line where you're going to get sued?
Yeah. And this is the thing we talked about just a few minutes ago in terms of, lowering the temperature. However, a nuisance is a nuisance. They're the people that will file that claim because they look forward to it. These people who don't obey the rules, but a lot of them know all the rules. And that's where the problem comes into play. When they come to you and say, yeah, but you didn't do X, and you should do Y. And that's where the problem comes into play. So as a board members, you got to understand one thing that's the easiest thing to do. Are they obeying the law? Okay. Are they obeying the rules? Are they obeying? If they're obeying, if they're doing things they should be doing, they're not violating these things, okay, then right off the bat, it puts in a different bucket. But if they're violating, so in other words, like we just talked about the increase the assessments. If they're 3 days late, even though he's a nuisance, you're going to have to agree. Okay, so any violation of any of the state feds or the governing documents, they could be the biggest nuisance in the world. Okay, but it's there. It's legitimate. You cannot, ignore them when they come to you and say, guess what? You're saying I'm reasonable, even though the documents say that you have to, notify them in a timely manner. And timely manner means 60 days. You haven't done it.
Yeah.
So
you got to have your own house in order.
You got to have your own house in order.
Yeah.
If they're a nuisance, but they're right, you got to listen to them. That's the key. Just because they are a nuisance doesn't mean they're wrong. So you got to understand right off the bat that if they're right, you got to say, oh, I heard you, let's fix this, which is the hardest thing to do. The hardest thing for humanity, for us as humans to do, is that we know that person who doesn't obey that rule. We talked about visitors parking. He's the guy who parks in visitors parking all the time, but at one time another person parks, he's the one saying, get rid of him, fine him, tow him, and we want to ignore them. We're going to have to understand that if that nuisance person is saying something that's right, you got to enforce it.
Yeah. That's a hard ask, but we are here to inspire. We're here to educate and encourage. And for our board members, yes, look at it. communicate, lower the temperature. And I think of, was it Abraham Lincoln had his cabinet of advisors that gave him regularly
with different ideas. Yes,
different ideas. And so it was good for him to consider different ideas and hone in on the truth. And Kevin, the truth is a great place to be.
Yes.
And even if it's an annoying person or a nuisance person, if they're pointing out that the landscaper wasn't here yesterday and, he skipped mowing the lawn in front of my house, you think, oh, gee, of all the people to miss mowing the lawn of, it was unit number 13. Yep. But the truth is the truth. You need to get on the phone and call the landscaper and say, hey, you missed at least a couple of homes over on this road.
Yeah. We have this conversation, and it feels like this is a hard conversation to have. But it's real, because what happens is when you don't do it, you go down this path of saying he's a nuisance, ignore him. And then when it gets to a point in time where something legitimate, all of a sudden that lawsuit comes in, and all of a sudden you're looking at, thousands and thousands of dollars because he was actually damaged. Because he was called a nuisance and he was right. Now, the other point is that now it's easy to see if the rule says what they say, and you have to enforce it. So if the landscaper missed that person's area, you got to do your job. Now, the landscaper may say, look, I can't come back now, but you did your job. You documented it, you investigated it, and you have a defense. The key thing, what you want to do is have a defense.
And one more thing is you probably want to call that person and say, or email that person and say, hey, we contacted the landscaper. He is off to another project. He will be back next week and we'll do your yard first. Or something like that.
That's the key. What you want to do is when you're dealing with the nuisance, just have a defense. Just do the investigating, document it, communicate it. And then you did your job, because certain things are not, like, let's go back to the wind chimes. It's not against the association laws to have wind chimes out there, And we talked about, when do you react? Well, you react when you say, okay, we investigated and found out that, guess what, those wind chimes, we don't have any wind. They've made no noise in the past 3 weeks. So guess what? I don't see a problem with that. We document it. So if we come back later and get sued because the board failed to handle that wind chimes, they didn't do their due diligence. Okay. We can say, yes, we did. We investigated and we thoroughly looked at it. And we said, guess what? It's not unreasonable. It's not unreasonable.
It's a small problem.
It's not serious. It's not serious.
Is that what this is all boiling down to? Keep your problems small.
Yes.
Don't let them build up. Communicate.
Okay? Yeah. Because that wind chimes can build up over time. If you don't, let's say you don't investigate. Let's say you just say, these guys are a nuisance. They're a pain in the butt. I don't care. And then what happens is, now that the wind chimes become a problem, he goes down and finds out, guess what? Wind chimes we have in our association, there's a lot of them. And then also they get everybody together and start. Everything gets bigger and bigger and bigger. If you take, again, we said lower the temperature, communicate effectively, and then all of a sudden you can eliminate a lot of these things. Do a little extra work. Again, all we want to do, and my job here is to say, you want to avoid being sued or something that you have control over.
So don't let the complaint or the person get so bothered that they're going to make a phone call to an attorney and you got a major problem on your hands. So keep your problem small.
Yep. And you can't even, they could pick the phone up and call their attorney, but all you want to do is have a defense by saying, yes, we listened, we heard, we investigated, and this is our conclusion, And now if you are sued, guess what happens? Your lawyer will say, guess what? You did your job. Because again, no judge wants to see these things. No judge want to hear that you were 2 days late on your assessments or you're 5 days late on your
this or that, or
elections. Nobody wants to hear that kind of stuff. But what happens is, if you're that nuisance, you're that person who feels they've been hurt because you ignored them or you call them a nuisance. Just call them a nuisance alone makes me feel, that I've been disrespected,
Yeah. Another thing I am hearing from you is this idea of categorizing them. I think that's a dangerous thing, in that you have people all around the association. Some of them are literally going to be your friends. Some of them are the vast majority. You see their faces. You see them, they have young kids or whatever it is. You see them, you're aware of them, but they never hit your radar. And then you have the people that are like, oh no, I feel, and correct me here, I feel it's okay for them to be, oh no, I don't like you, but you don't want to go to the step where, oh no, I shun you and I am not going to listen to you and I'm going to ignore you, because those seem like those are the people that the problem is going to get bigger and bigger until it's going to pop.
Let me add one more piece to it. You go one step further and you label them as somebody different.
Ooh.
That's the difference. Again, when we call them a nuisance, we're labeling as something outside the norm. Once you label that person a nuisance, you're not like everybody else. You're different, and they'll feel different, and that's where your lawsuit comes into play. Because now I'm being mistreated. I've been bullied. It goes back to I'm being bullied. I've been discriminated against.
Is that almost the definition of the problem when it gets to the point where they move from, I don't like him or her, and that's okay, to I've labeled them? Is that a trigger that we want?
That's why I love talking to you, because at the end of the day, that's what happens is that we're treating them different by labeling them a nuisance. We put them over. They're not like everybody else. And that's when that nuisance gets to a point where they feel they've been mistreated. And that's when all of a sudden you feel that, guess what? I'm being bullied. I'm being discriminated against. Because all I did is tell them to have an election in 60 days. They didn't listen to me. Or to pass the assessments in a timely manner. They didn't listen to me. And the reason why they're going after me right now is because I'm a protected class, or you've been bullying me, you've been harassing me, and that's where it goes. And that, you're right. That's the end of the day, what we're talking about here. There's a group of people in that association who pays their assessments, that obeys the rules, the duck on the water and the duck's back, they stays in it, doesn't bother anybody. But then there's the nuisance that we just don't like, we ignore them. But once we label them a nuisance, they are no longer part of the community. They are outsiders. And when they become outsiders, guess what happens? Now all of a sudden, they've been damaged because they've been one of the others now. And today, we don't like the others. There's a group, we put people over there, and they don't like to be otherized, if that's the word.
Otherized. I like that.
Yeah.
Don't be otherized.
Yeah.
And I'm also hearing you say when we categorize them, they can probably feel it. And that's when they feel it, and then the association is against me, and I can see it, I can feel it, and they're not responding to me. They're not treating me like a full-fledged member of the association. And my rights are damaged, and then you get a cascade of bad things going on.
And it goes back to the one thing now, all of a sudden, and you were late on the assessments by 2 days. And then all of a sudden, you ignore them. Now all of a sudden, they go to court, and the judge says, well, you were late for 2 days, and, you weren't, that's where the lawsuit comes in, and that's where you're hurt, and that's where you've been damaged. That's when you start talking about the thousands and thousands of dollars of awards. It comes in because just because he's a nuisance doesn't mean he's wrong.
Right. Don't label him. Well, Kevin, I'm looking at the time here. As always, it's great talking with you. So many lights go off in my brain. You connect the dots on all these issues. You brought me back many years to when I was a board member at my association. Any closing thoughts to add at this time?
I think we kind of mentioned it. Consistency. You got to be consistent in what you're doing. You're going to have to document. You're going to have to investigate. If you do that, at the end of the day, you want to provide a defense for yourself when that person who's a nuisance comes back to you and say, guess what? I've been otherized. So we found a new word. I don't know if it's a real word or not, but we got to remember that as a board members, you don't want to otherize anybody else, because that's where your damages come into play. That's when the lawsuit, that's when my insurance policy comes into play. And I don't want my insurance policy to come into play at all.
Nope. We want to be good neighbors and tolerant to everyone in the association. It's a challenge, but
exactly.
To our audience, we're going to ask you to step up. Well, we hope you learned some HOA insights from our discussion today that helps you bring common sense to your common area. We look forward to having you join us for another great episode next week.
You've been listening to HOA Insights, common sense for common areas. If you like the show and want to support the work that we do, you can do so in a number of ways. The most important thing that you can do is engage in the conversation. Leave a question in the comments section on our YouTube videos. You can also email your questions or voice memos to podcast@reservestudy.com or leave us a voicemail at 203-3130. If you gain any insights from the show, please do us a huge favor by sharing the show with other board members that you know. You can also support us by supporting the brands that sponsor this program. Please remember that the views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the hosts and guests, with the goal of providing general education about the community association industry. You'll want to consult licensed professionals before making any important decisions. Finally, this podcast was expertly mixed and mastered by Stoke Video and Marketing. With Stoke on your team, you'll reach more customers with marketing expertise that inspires action. See the show notes to connect with Stoke.